What if I told you that the most powerful tool you'll ever own is not your bank account, not your intelligence, and not even your connections? It's the belief you hold about yourself. Think about that for a second. Two people can stand side by side with the exact same opportunities, the same resources, and even the same struggles. Yet, their lives can move in completely opposite directions. One rises to unimaginable heights, while the other stays stuck in the same place, convinced the mountain is too high to climb. Why does this happen? Why do some people break through while others surrender? The answer is not luck. It's not raw talent. It's something far less visible, yet infinitely more powerful: self-belief. Now here's where it gets fascinating. Psychologists and neuroscientists have uncovered that self-belief isn't just some motivational slogan you hang on a wall. It literally reshapes the brain. When you choose to believe in yourself, you activate neural circuits that boost confidence, motivation, and resilience. Your brain begins to release different chemicals, dopamine and serotonin, that influence how you feel and how you act. Belief changes perception. It alters the way you see obstacles, turning them from walls into doors. And here's the kicker. Your brain doesn't even know the difference between truth and belief. It only responds to the story you keep feeding it. Tell it you're powerless, and it will make that story real. Tell it you're capable, and it will reorganize itself to help you find proof. Few lives illustrate this more powerfully than the life of Oprah Winfrey. From the outside, her story looked like a blueprint for failure. Born into crushing poverty in rural Mississippi, raised by a single teenage mother, exposed to abuse, rejection, and countless hardships, the odds weren't just against her, they were practically impossible. She was told she wasn't good enough, wasn't pretty enough, and certainly wasn't the kind of person who could ever belong on television. To most, her future seemed decided before it had even begun. But Oprah did something extraordinary. Instead of letting the world write her story, she picked up the pen herself. She didn't wait for a teacher, a network, or society to validate her. She started by validating herself. She trained her brain to see worth where others only saw weakness. She fed her mind new stories. Stories of possibility, of resilience, of becoming more than what the world expected of her. And that single choice, to believe in herself before anyone else did, was the spark that rewired her brain, unlocked her happiness, and ultimately built her future. Today, Oprah isn't just a billionaire, a media leader, or a cultural icon. She is living proof of what happens when self-belief becomes your foundation. Her journey reminds us that the stories you tell yourself don't just live in your mind. They shape your biology, your actions, and ultimately, your destiny. The science of self-belief. When you choose to believe in yourself, something extraordinary happens inside your brain. It's not a vague idea, not just a feel-good motivational slogan. It's a biological event. Every thought you think is a signal. And your brain, this 3-pound organ of pure electricity and chemistry, listens carefully to every single one. The moment you say to yourself, "I can do this," your brain takes that message seriously. It begins releasing chemicals that change the way you feel. Dopamine, the brain's reward chemical, kicks in first. It's like your internal fuel. Suddenly you feel a burst of energy, a sharpened focus, a drive to act. It's the same chemical that fires up when you accomplish something important, but here's the incredible part. Your brain releases it not just after success, but even when you imagine success. Just picturing yourself capable can trigger your reward system to get moving. Then comes serotonin, the chemical of stability and confidence. It whispers to you, "You're safe. You're strong. You're worthy of this moment." Together, these neurotransmitters lift your state of mind, boost your courage, and push you to take steps forward instead of retreating. In short, your belief literally changes your biology. And here's the truly mind-blowing part. The more you repeat this, the more your brain rewires itself. This is the science of neuroplasticity. Imagine walking through a thick, wild forest. The first time you push through, it's painful. Branches scratch your skin, your feet sink in the mud, and you can barely see where you're going. That's what it feels like when you start practicing self-belief after years of doubt. It feels unnatural. But every time you walk that same path, it becomes easier. You break more branches, smooth out the soil, let in more light. Eventually, you've carved a clear trail. A trail your brain automatically chooses. What once felt impossible now feels natural. But the opposite is also true. If your thoughts are filled with doubt, "I'll fail. I'm not smart enough. I'll never make it. Then your brain faithfully builds those pathways too. And the cruel reality is, the brain doesn't stop to argue. It doesn't check the facts. It doesn't ask, is this belief really true? It simply takes your word for it and wires itself accordingly. Over time, negativity becomes the path of least resistance, the default highway of your mind. This is why self-belief is not just optimism. It is not denial of reality. It's a conscious choice about which neural pathways you want your brain to strengthen. Believing in yourself is not about ignoring your struggles. It's about deciding that your struggles do not define you. It's about planting a new story so deeply into your mind that your brain begins to live it as truth. And Oprah Winfrey's life is one of the most powerful demonstrations of this science in action. She had every reason to wire her brain for fear and failure. Born into poverty, raised by a teenage single mother, shuffled between unstable homes, exposed to abuse at a young age, her brain could have easily cemented pathways of worthlessness and despair. The world around her told her she wasn't good enough, not pretty enough, not the kind of girl who belonged on television. That message was repeated so often it could have become her permanent reality. But here's what makes Oprah different. She refused to let those voices decide her future. Instead of feeding her brain the story of defeat, she chose to tell herself a different one. She imagined more for her life. She practiced self-belief even when there was no evidence to support it. And with each repetition, with every time she said, "I am worthy, I am capable, I will rise," she carved a new path in her mind. The old pathways of doubt weakened, while the new ones grew stronger. When she landed her first job in radio at just 19, people told her she didn't have the right look, the right voice, or the right personality for broadcasting. Most would have taken that rejection as proof they weren't enough. But Oprah had already wired her brain to see rejection differently. Not as a wall, but as a stepping stone. Instead of quitting, she doubled down, sharpened her skills, and leaned into her authenticity. That resilience came not from luck, not from talent, but from the mental architecture she had been building for years through self-belief. And as her career grew, so did her brain's wiring. Every success strengthened the new pathway, until belief became her default setting. It wasn't that the challenges disappeared. She still faced setbacks, criticism, and enormous pressure. But her brain had been trained to respond differently. Instead of collapsing under doubt, it rose with possibility. This is the true power of self-belief. It doesn't just change how you feel. It changes the structure of your brain. It shapes how you respond to life, how you see opportunities, and ultimately what you become. Oprah's story shows us that when you decide to wire your brain differently, you don't just survive your circumstances. You transform them. Story 1. Fired from her first job. At just 22 years old, Oprah Winfrey landed what many would have considered a dream opportunity. A job as a television news anchor in Baltimore. For a young black woman in the 1970s, this was nothing short of groundbreaking. She had broken through barriers that very few women of color had ever crossed. From the outside, it looked like a huge victory. But behind the scenes, it was anything but glamorous. Oprah struggled. She was still learning her craft. She stumbled over words. Her emotions often broke through while reporting heavy stories. Something that was seen as unprofessional in the world of stiff, detached news anchors. The culture of television at that time demanded polished voices, cold delivery, and a look that fit the narrow image of what a news anchor should be. Oprah didn't fit that mold, and her bosses made sure she knew it. Then came the devastating moment. She was pulled aside and told bluntly, "You're just not right for television." Imagine hearing that at 22, right when your career is just beginning. Those 6 words could have shattered her. Most people, after hearing something so final, would have walked away. They would have accepted it as a verdict on their future. And neurologically, that kind of rejection can be brutal. Studies show that social rejection activates the same areas of the brain as physical pain. In other words, her brain likely felt that statement as if it were a wound. And here's where most stories would have ended. That one rejection could have carved a permanent neural pathway of doubt. I'm not good enough. I don't belong here. If Oprah had let that belief take root, her brain would have wired itself to avoid risks, to settle for less, to play small. She might never have tried again. But Oprah did something radically different. Instead of letting the rejection define her, she reframed it. She chose to see it not as the end, but as redirection. She asked herself, what if I'm not meant to be their version of a news anchor? What if I'm meant to be something else entirely? That mental shift is everything. Neuroscience tells us that when we reframe failure, the prefrontal cortex, the rational, problem-solving part of the brain, activates, while the amygdala, the fear center, calms down. In other words, by choosing a new perspective, Oprah literally changed her brain's response to failure. That decision rewired more than just her career. It rewired her identity. She wasn't a rejected news anchor anymore. She was someone who could create her own path. And that small but powerful belief became the foundation for everything that came later. Story 2. The Oprah Winfrey Show breakthrough. A few years later, Oprah found herself in a completely different role. Instead of reading the news, she was given the chance to host a small, struggling morning talk show in Chicago called AM Chicago. On paper, it looked like a step down. The show had poor ratings, it wasn't prestigious, and many people saw it as a dumping ground for careers that had lost their spark. But here's where Oprah's unique gift began to shine. She didn't try to copy other hosts. She didn't force herself to sound polished or detached. She leaned fully into her authenticity, the very thing her first bosses told her was a weakness. If a guest cried, she cried with them. If someone shared a painful truth, she listened with her whole heart. She didn't hide her emotions. She shared them. And for the first time, television audiences saw something different. A host who was real. The results were immediate. People connected with her. They trusted her. They tuned in not just for the guests, but for her. Within just a few months, AM Chicago went from low-rated filler to the #1 talk show in the city. And soon after, it was renamed The Oprah Winfrey Show. What began as a failing local program became a global cultural phenomenon, reaching millions of people every day for more than 25 years. But here's the psychological magic behind it. Oprah succeeded not because she became what others wanted, but because she believed that her authentic self was enough. And that belief had a ripple effect, not just in her life, but in the lives of her audience. Science now explains what Oprah was intuitively doing. Living authentically reduces activity in the brain's stress circuits and lowers cortisol levels. It also boosts oxytocin, the bonding hormone, which makes people feel safe, connected, and understood. Every time Oprah showed up as her real self, she wasn't just calming her own brain. She was triggering oxytocin in millions of viewers. That invisible brain chemistry created loyalty, trust, and connection. Her authenticity became her superpower. The same vulnerability that once got her fired had now become the exact reason for her success. This is a perfect example of how reframing rejection doesn't just change your story. It changes your brain, your biology, and ultimately your destiny. Oprah didn't just build a talk show. She built an empire out of authenticity. And the foundation of that empire was self-belief. Story 3. Turning pain into power. Oprah has never hidden from the truth of her past. She has spoken openly about the scars of her childhood, the poverty so deep that sometimes she wore dresses made of potato sacks, the instability of being shuffled between relatives' homes, and the unthinkable trauma of being abused at a young age. These are wounds that could have easily defined her, wounds that in countless other lives have led to cycles of pain, self-doubt, and silence. And yet, Oprah made a choice that very few people ever make. Instead of running from her pain, she leaned into it. She refused to let it be the chain that held her down. She chose to transform it into her source of power. She often repeats the phrase, "Turn your wounds into wisdom." And that's not just a poetic mantra. It's neuroscience. When you revisit painful memories through the lens of growth, your brain begins to process them differently. Instead of the amygdala, the fear center, controlling the memory, your prefrontal cortex, the center of rational thinking and resilience, takes the lead. Over time, this rewiring allows you to recall those painful events without being controlled by them. The pain doesn't vanish, but it stops ruling your life. Oprah's courage to confront her past instead of burying it is precisely what gave her voice its power. When she sat across from her guests, when she listened to ordinary people share extraordinary struggles, she wasn't listening from a place of judgment. She was listening from a place of knowing. And audiences felt it. They trusted her, because they could sense that she had lived through the fire herself. This is why her story resonates with millions of people across the world. She is living proof that no matter how dark your past may be, no matter how deep the wounds, your brain has the extraordinary ability to rewire itself toward healing, growth, and even joy. Your past may shape you, but it does not have to define you. The contagious energy of belief. Here's something most people overlook. Belief isn't just personal. It's contagious. Neuroscience tells us that humans are wired with mirror neurons, brain cells that reflect the emotions and energy of the people around us. When you walk into a room filled with negativity, you feel it instantly. But when you stand near someone who carries genuine self-belief, something inside you shifts. You begin to feel more capable, more open, more alive. That's the energy Oprah carried. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't the loud, flashy confidence that tries to convince others. It was a quiet, unshakable certainty in who she was and what she was meant to do. And that certainty radiated. On her show, guests who planned to stay guarded often found themselves opening up in ways they never had before. Audiences didn't just watch, they felt seen, safe, inspired. This wasn't manipulation. It was resonance. Oprah's brain wasn't wired for fear. It was wired for possibility. And human beings naturally respond to possibility. Think about it. The people you admire most, the leaders, mentors, and visionaries who change history, they don't just carry belief for themselves. They carry enough belief to ignite it in others. Oprah was one of those rare people whose self-belief became a spark that lit fires in millions of hearts around the world. Happiness as a byproduct of belief. Most people live by a dangerous formula. I'll be happy when I succeed. I'll be happy when I make more money, when I get the promotion, when I'm loved, when I'm enough. But this formula keeps happiness forever out of reach, dangling it like a carrot at the end of a stick. Science, and Oprah's life, prove the opposite is true. Success doesn't create happiness. Happiness creates success. When your brain is wired with self-belief, happiness stops being a reward you wait for. It becomes your baseline. You don't need external validation to feel worthy. You don't need to reach the mountaintop to enjoy the climb. Happiness becomes something you generate from within, and that inner joy is what fuels achievement. Positive psychology research shows that people who cultivate happiness first, through gratitude, optimism, and self-belief, are more resilient, more productive, and more successful in the long run. Their brains literally operate better. Creativity increases, problem-solving sharpens, motivation skyrockets. Happiness isn't a side effect of success. It's the fuel that makes success possible. Oprah understood this truth at the deepest level. She once said, "The greatest discovery of all time is that a person can change his future by merely changing his attitude." And she lived it. Her life wasn't the result of waiting for happiness to arrive. It was the result of building happiness, moment by moment, thought by thought, belief by belief. Her story reminds us that happiness is not something you chase. It's something you create. And when you create it, success becomes not just possible, but inevitable. How you can apply this in your life. So, how can you rewire your brain the way Oprah did? The truth is, self-belief isn't just a nice idea. It's a daily practice. Just like a muscle, your belief grows stronger the more you train it. Here are some powerful steps you can start using right now. Reframe failure. Every setback carries two possible labels. Failure or feedback. The words you choose decide which pathway your brain strengthens. Instead of saying, "I failed," try, "I learned." Neuroscience shows that this shift lights up the brain's resilience circuits. Over time, you begin to see obstacles not as dead ends but as detours toward growth. Oprah faced rejection after rejection in her early career, but she treated every closed door as information, not as identity. You can do the same. Practice daily affirmations. Your brain rewires through repetition. Every time you tell yourself, "I am capable," or "I am worthy," you're not just speaking empty words, you're literally strengthening the neural pathways of confidence. At first, it may feel awkward, even fake. But just like exercising a weak muscle, consistency creates strength. Eventually, those words begin to feel natural, and belief takes root in your subconscious. Visualize your future. The brain doesn't completely distinguish between vivid imagination and reality. That's why athletes rehearse their performances in their minds before ever stepping onto the field. Oprah often spoke about visualizing her dreams long before they happened. Seeing herself on stage, connecting with people, building a life of purpose. When you close your eyes and picture the life you want, your brain begins preparing for it as though it's already real. Surround yourself with believers. The people you spend time with literally shape the chemistry of your brain. Negative voices can drain your energy and strengthen circuits of doubt, while supportive voices fuel confidence and optimism. Oprah credits much of her resilience to the mentors and friends who believed in her even when she didn't fully believe in herself. You don't need a large circle. Just a few people who remind you of your strength can change everything. Celebrate progress. One of the fastest ways to build belief is to recognize your wins, no matter how small. Every time you celebrate progress, your brain releases dopamine, the motivation chemical. This doesn't just make you feel good. It conditions your brain to crave growth. Oprah didn't wait for monumental victories to celebrate. She acknowledged the small steps that carried her forward. And those small steps built unstoppable momentum. Closing. The secret Oprah shared. Oprah Winfrey is not extraordinary because she never struggled. She is extraordinary because she refused to let her struggles define her. She understood that self-belief wasn't just a feeling. It was a skill to be practiced, rewired, and strengthened every single day. When she was fired from her first job as a news anchor, she could have given up. Instead, she told herself that rejection was redirection, that the universe was guiding her to where she truly belonged. When her early talk show struggled in the ratings, she could have followed the script, copied others, and played it safe. But instead, she leaned into her most powerful asset: authenticity. She believed that her true self was enough, and that belief changed television forever. When she faced the deep pain and trauma of her childhood, she could have let it harden her heart. But instead, she rewired her brain to turn pain into wisdom, and wisdom into power. Not just for herself, but for millions of people who would one day find hope in her story. And that is her real secret. Happiness isn't something you wait for. It's not something the world gives you when circumstances are perfect. Happiness is something you create, by the way you think, the way you speak to yourself, and the way you choose to see your struggles. The most powerful truth is this: the ability to rewire your brain isn't Oprah's gift alone. It belongs to you too. Your brain is listening. Every thought, every word, every belief you hold is shaping the person you are becoming. So the next time doubt whispers in your mind, "You're not enough, you'll fail again," pause, and remember this: your brain believes the story you repeat the most. Choose the story that empowers you. Choose the belief that lifts you. Because when you believe in yourself, you're not just inspiring your mind. You're physically rewiring your brain for happiness, for resilience, for success, and for peace. That's the lesson Oprah's life teaches us. And if you decide to live by it, that same power can transform your life in ways you can't yet imagine.